Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, crime. I've got two noir classics for you. The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler and The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. So I read both of these for Dictember, the month-long private eye reading event that was organised by Sean D. Stanfast and Mark from Book Time with Elvis, which is a fantastic event. I love crime fiction, I love private eye fiction, and it was a real pleasure to delve back to two of the kind of really seminal works of noirish private eye fiction. The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler and The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. And I wanted to talk about them together because they are two books which are, there are many differences between them, but there are also many similarities. And I think part of the reason for the similarities is that they're kind of intrinsically linked in our kind of public mind, because in the 40s, Humphrey Bogart starred in the movie adaptations of both films. So the Dashiell Hammett book, The Maltese Falcon, was published in 1930, and The Big Sleep was published in 39. But both of them were filmed in the 40s when Bogart was kind of at the height of his fame, and he starred as the detective in both, which I think makes them probably feel more similar than they actually are. So let me talk a little bit about the similarities and then get into the differences. So both are noirish private eye novels with a kind of lone hero detective hired on a case which ends up being something quite different from what he expects. So those really are the only similarities. In both of them, I guess there are kind of femme fatale type characters, and clearly there are mysteries to be solved. There's a little bit of violence in both, but not huge amounts. And they're both, thoroughly entertaining books, and both books which are, kind of landmarks of the genre. But there are, as I said at the start, there are a lot of differences between them. The first and most obvious one, which hits you right from the first page, is that whereas The Big Sleep is written in the first person, Maltese Falcon is written in the third person. And I tend to think of this kind of, noirish detective fiction as being a first person thing. You think about that kind of, that internal monologue that the detective has where he's describing things in a very hard boiled way. And that is, there's an element of that in through the narrator in The Maltese Falcon, but it's much, much more present in the Raymond Chandler book. The other big difference between the two is that the Big Sleep is far more complicated than The Maltese Falcon. The Maltese Falcon is quite a simple book, to be honest with you. So Sam Spade, the hero, is hired by a young woman who claims that her sister has been led astray by this guy, and Spade is hired to follow this guy and find out what's going on. Similarly, and this is a definite similarity, in The Big Sleep, Philip Marlowe, the detective, is hired by an old guy to look into the affairs of his daughter who's being blackmailed. So in both of them, the detective is kind of a crusading character who is hired to save a young woman from some kind of moral peril. Where they differ is and both books go, take that initial start and go in a very different direction. But as I said, the direction that The Big Sleep goes in is far more complicated. It twists and turns all over the place. It's quite dizzying at times. Whereas The Maltese Falcon is a much more straightforward kind of linear story. And fairly quickly you get the concept of this Maltese Falcon, this treasured thing that people are hunting for, comes up, and it ends up being about the hunt for that object. In both books, there's a ton of stuff about kind of lies and deception and things like that. So things are never quite what they seem in either book. And the role of the detective is to dig through all that and get to the truth. And in particular, people are deceptive. So people have hidden motives, do things that don't seem to make sense at first, and it's up to the detective character to dig into that and find out why these things are happening. So that's definitely a similarity, and something that I think has become really central to the detective genre. So that the kind of gender role thing, was clearly a mainstay of the genre through the through to the 70s and 80s. I think things are changing now, and we're seeing more female detectives, and also a more balanced view, shall we say, of the genders, and it not just being about kind of male characters saving female characters, but that's definitely a theme in both of these books. So both of these detectives, as I've said, are definitely crusaders, and both go above and beyond what they needed to do to solve the case. They get kind of personally involved in the case and take it to extremes, really. I think Marlowe does that more than Spade, but Spade definitely does it to an extent as well. There are moments in both books where they could just walk away. But they keep going, and particularly in The Big Sleep, we constantly get reference to the fact that Philip Marlowe is basically getting paid peanuts for all this hard work, and yet he still does it because he's driven to. And I think that is something that is very true of many heroes throughout the second half of the 20th century. If you think up to the early 2000s, someone like Jack Bauer. In the series 24, who is just completely driven and does whatever is necessary to get justice, even when he has to do terrible things. And I think that is something that I'm not saying that this is that these books were the first time that happened, but it's certainly something that they cemented in the kind of detective and thriller genre. This notion of the hero having to go through terrible things in order to get to a resolution. When you compare it to earlier detectives like like Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, even those detectives tend not to get into perilous situations themselves. They are they kind of calmly and collectedly look at the mysteries in an intellectual way in order to solve them. Whereas for both Spade and Marlowe, they have to get much more physically involved, and certainly in the Sam Spade book, there's a lot of just kind of shoe leather. There's a lot of just walking around talking to people to try and figure out what's going on. And what's interesting is that Hammett himself was a detective, so he had worked for the Pinkerton Agency before becoming a writer, so he did know a bit about what he was writing about. I do think that Chandler is the better writer. So as I've said, that the plot of The Big Sleep is incredibly complex, but he manages to juggle it very well, so that it never overwhelms the reader. Despite the intricacy of it, and he also just writes better prose. So the Maltese Falcon, the prose is fairly sparse, it's fairly plain, which I don't mind at all, and that's not a criticism, but there isn't the depth to it and the artistry that you get in The Big Sleep. The kind of classic similes and things like that you get are absolutely wonderful. The dialogue and as I said, Marlowe's internal monologues are just fantastic. They're an absolute joy to read, aside from the detective aspects of the story. But yeah, both very, very enjoyable stories. I enjoyed The Big Sleep slightly more because of that, but mostly, to be honest, because of the language and because it's just such fun to read. But both, very, very much recommended, and I'm going to look forward to reading more by both authors. As always, thanks very much for watching. Let me know if you've read The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep and what you thought of them. But until next time, hope you're safe and well, hope you're really good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.